So now we are live everywhere, I think. Hello, YouTube. Hello, Instagram, and hello, Facebook. Okay, an amazing topic today. And I think I would really enjoy this because a lot is to be said and a lot is to be discussed about on this topic where actually all of us has their own opinion. You should also write in the comments what you're thinking about. Do the dog have consciousness? And what do you think actually the consciousness is? And how do we type in all of this vague, defined field of how can I say that? Of awareness? And how would we, because in order to become a responsible owners, you can be and we can be a doggy mom and doggy dads, no matter how the people interact with that, humanizing and over-humanizing the dogs. Of course, humanizing a dog is not possible because you can't bring the dog on a level of the human. What actually is happening in that environment, if we try to humanize the dog, that doesn't happen. What happens is animalizing of humans. So the humans raise to a level of animal if we do not protect ourselves from this trap. So if we gonna be responsible doggy moms, doggy dads, owners, masters, call us ourselves, use whichever, why?
Just I think it's better if you talk directly into the mic, if possible, so there's not a big echo.
So there is an echo now. Can we just, is it an echo? Can anyone tell us, do you hear echo? And if there is an echo, then let's fix the echo. If no, let's move on with our topic. It's perfect.
Okay.
Huh?
Okay, go ahead. Sorry for the distraction. So you were saying...
What did I say?
You were saying it's not possible to humanize the dog because they can't be elevated. We can only lower our rank in hopes of fitting in with them.
Unfortunately, that's what happens. And then how would I, like, I'm observing these phenomena of human-dog interaction for a long time. And that is why I started to talk about the dogs and awakening in order to have a dogs as a guidance by our side, in order to elevate our consciousness around what means being an animal, living with an animal in the same environment, and what means giving a proper care to an animal without that emotional entanglement. So we're going to touch base on these things, like how do we humanize the dogs? And if we call ourselves doggy moms and doggy dads, and we slip in that environment, claiming our dogs be our children, our angels, our this, our that, and all kind of other things that we oftentimes do claim around this interaction, what we feel we are to our animals, and that's only because of the emotional entanglement. And if we emotionally entangle with an animal, that's what we become. But it's dangerous not having an awareness of that, because then unconsciously the life in front of us gonna just shower us with the result: lack of social human to human interaction. Why? Because the heart is occupied by an animal. So if you really want to become a nice and conscious and aware owner of the dog, doggy mom, doggy dad, doggy mom, the mom would do everything for the children, but projecting her own fears, her own dreams, her own unfinished and unrealized reality of life onto her children, because then the children are going to suffer. Why, if we don't do that to our human children, and we claim that responsible leadership in a family, like being responsible mom and responsible dad, means inspire the children to go and unleash their human potential and then live their life into a human, live their life up to a full engagement into a life. Why wouldn't we do anything different to our dogs? But in order to know the dogs, we really need to declutter our mind and our knowledge about who the dogs are, what the dogs needs from us, how do we get to the point where actually we give a space to the dog to be a dog and learn from them how to be responsible human to an animal. And we can interact on a level doggy mom and doggy dad to our doggy child, but then know the child, know the needs of the child, know what the child wants, and then provide them everything they need and they want, regardless what we think about that. Because usually what we do to our dogs now, we provide them what we think they need. And then you end up having a problem with the dog, leaving it at home. He doesn't want to eat. He doesn't want to walk. He bites everyone. He's not socialized with an animal, with the people, with this, with that. All of that results in the dog responding to an environment created by his humans. And they can't fix it. So in order to fix it, they try to save us. And from that, we enter that inhumane and inanimal, it's both sides suffer in emotional entanglements. It's not fair. It's not fair to humans. It's not fair to an animal. But let's dive, I was just I was just maybe too harsh, I guess. Like always.
I don't think it was too harsh, but it's a reality that if somebody is not, well developed, mature, self-aware, that, probably they wouldn't even be listening to you if they were like that. But they're, the cognitive dissonance is so strong for some people that, they might not be ready to receive this type of message. And again, I think it's important to understand, because we're getting a lot of feedback from the viewers, that we're not trying to say that the dogs are some elevated creatures or that we're putting them on a pedestal. We just are recognizing that they're living beings with their own fundamental needs. And as long as we can provide for them those fundamental needs without all that extra baggage, they can actually thrive, be happy, and live a normal life, which is ultimately what we want to do. Is we want to give all the dogs an opportunity to live a normal life. And now we can, unpack what normal means.
Yeah. So okay, let's start from the beginning. The topic of today, this little live and chat is the dog consciousness. Do the dog have consciousness? What we need in order to raise the consciousness, and how high certain organisms or certain physiologies can raise the consciousness. So since you are studying, that's your field, that's your expertise. So I'm going to be today one listening and learning more of this. So you are studying on the Vedic University, you're studying consciousness and human potential, right?
Correct.
So Vedran is studying the consciousness and human potential. And now I think it's maybe a good time that you kind of share with us what actually consciousness is, and which kind of physiological or neurological foundation need to be present in order for any organism to give a rise to the energy of consciousness and then enjoy the fruits and benefits of that.
Well, if I could answer that question, I wouldn't be sitting here. No,
don't go there. You. When I asked you another day, you was like very smooth in.
Oh, you had a piece of fruit.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm not by any means an expert on this topic, and I do enjoy studying and learning at the Maharishi International University. But so from Maharishi's point of view, who was an Indian sage teacher, a lot of people know him from the Beatles, from Oprah, and from the celebrity pop culture. But in their point of view,
but why? Because he introduced transcendental meditation to a Western world. So transcending. He find out that if mind transcends, is able to tap into this wonderful source of unity consciousness where all answers are. So now that was maybe also a good topic to add to a Maharishi if someone doesn't know for him, but they probably heard about the transcendental meditation, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can just Google it or look it up. It's just tm.org. And again, we don't have any affiliations with them, or, we're not sponsored by them, unfortunately.
But it's a good technique. Yeah.
So basically, consciousness is all there is. Consciousness is everything in their point of view. And then the hard problem of consciousness is, this is what philosophers, scientists are struggling with, is how does subjectivity arise from an object, or how does an object give rise to subjectivity? And
what is the object?
Well, the object is the brain.
So there you go. So
the mind.
The brain or the mind? Is that the same? Is the brain a mind?
For all intensive purposes, yes.
So the brain is a mind.
Correct.
Okay, so the brain is a physical object, right?
That gives rise to subjective experiences, which we would call our reality.
And what does the consciousness has with that to do with that?
The consciousness is how you experience everything.
So if
you have self-consciousness, it means that you're a living being that feels and that can, you can see yourself. But in terms of dogs, there is, mainstream studies are looking at this from from different views. For example, they'll do the mirror test, which they do on small infant children to see if they have self-conscious, if they can recognize themselves. And it turns out that dogs actually don't. But the Tomsk University in Russia, you can look this up. There was a famous scientist, Roberto Cazzola Gatti. He actually wanted to study this deeper. So what he did is he found a pack, or, he studied wild dogs. I wouldn't say wild dogs, stray dogs. And he collected their urine samples and then placed them in different strategic parts throughout the town. And then when the dogs reappeared, they sniffed their scent less than others. So based on that, they determined, he can smell his own urine. He must be self-aware.
Oh, but does that have so self-awareness actually does mean that I'm aware of what's going on within me when I experience sometime outside myself, right? So I'm aware of the reality around me, and I'm pursuing reality from my own self. Interaction of the reality within and outside is actually a consciousness. So why the physiology is very important for the consciousness is because without physiology, the brain is not functioning. Without a brain, and also it's not only enough for the brain to function and for the physiology to be present and the brain to function to give a rise to a consciousness, because oftentimes we will have people that are in coma, they're alive, so their physiology operates on a certain level. However, the brain is not operating on the level that is enough to give a rise of the consciousness. So those people in coma are alive, their physiology is structured around the giving a life to them, but they are not aware of either what's going around them to interact with the reality outside, or not enough able to express what's going within if they are aware of that reality as well. So that's very important to understand that physiology is not enough for the organism or for the self to raise a consciousness. The consciousness, again, means awareness of the world around and of my perception and reality, how I do pursue reality around. And how Vedran started very amazingly is how the physical object, like a brain, give a rise to some higher spiritual awareness of the world outside and within. So when we put it on such a complicated physiology, brain interaction level, the question becomes like, how developed organism need to be in order to give a rise, so the how developed brain organisms or the animal need to have in order to give a rise to a consciousness, so that they don't only respond on the circumstances around themselves like not an intuition, like based on it might be an intuition, right? The
Nature,
like just responding to a nature around themselves, but also become emotionally aware of what's going on within themselves and how do they pursue world around themselves. So that's a very important structure that need to be considered if we want to really talk about rising a consciousness that will that animals going to be able to experience their own feelings and their own self within the objective reality. So can the dog be subjective? That's the question, because the subjectivity, the consciousness does include subjectivity, right? It is a subjective perception.
well, it's everything. It's all permeating. It's at different levels of functioning. So you were mentioning earlier that somebody could be totally knocked out, but that's one of the 7 states of consciousness. Either you're in a dreaming state or you're in a sleeping state when you're totally knocked out. So you have no thoughts. So that can still be interpreted as some degree of consciousness. So I think there's different levels.
But are the people in a coma sleeping? Like, are they? Do they dream? Do we talk about a dreaming state of consciousness or sleeping state of consciousness? Does the sleeping always include dreaming?
No, there's 2 levels. There's either dreaming where thoughts are arising, or there's totally knocked out sleeping where you have no thoughts.
And that's
that you don't remember.
But you're still conscious.
Correct.
On some other level.
Correct.
So now, what do you think, if you put all of those things together, like, is the dog's physiology and brain enough to give rise to a consciousness of some degree or state?
Me personally, I think it's more instinctive, yes. I think, they are very aware, they're very smart, they can smell people. I've noticed stray dogs, they'll growl or bark at people that are like drunk on the streets or that are acting crazy, and they'll just ignore, quote unquote, the normal people. So I think they have a deep intuition and a sense of smell, but do they have necessarily a subjectivity? I think that's reserved for
discussion,
more developed beings like humans, for example.
And now that puts us in a real dilemma. Like, if we interact with the dogs like a conscious being, like the dogs are thinking like a humans. The dog have thoughts of past and future, and based on that, they create the response on the past and the future. Now the question becomes, is the consciousness present in the future and in the past, or it's only the experience of now, within and outside? That's the point as well. So if we put the point that the dogs don't live in the past, they take an experience from the past into a present, and then by acting in the present, they create future. The humans are operating on the thoughts that usually creates fear and uncertainty when we think about past experiences and want to project them in future, creating a negative outcome. That also causes anxiety into a human, among the humans as well. So now, if we are now become am I aware of myself and the reality around myself, if my thoughts are in the past or in the future? Am I conscious or am I aware? Where is my awareness and how high is my consciousness? How is my subjectivity? Actually, it doesn't exist. Why doesn't exist? Because I'm not present. I'm not present, and by experiencing the thoughts and monkey mind, as oftentimes the sages would call the mind, that he's operate on the level of like a monkey giving you all kind of thoughts that doesn't have anything to do with the reality. But the question becomes like, if I'm constantly in the state of mind thinking, and what I'm thinking about, I'm thinking about what happened, or I'm predicting what's going to happen, and in those two abstract realities that actually doesn't exist, I completely lose awareness of the present moment and completely lose possibility to interact with my future, like living to become a result of my present actions. So now when we talk about the dogs, and every single thing that I was able to research on these 30 years, that the biggest, you remember, we were very deeply exploring the wolf watching experiment, right? So do you remember what was the difference in between wolf puppy when learning with the humans and the dog puppy when learning with the humans? You remember when they were when they were trying to get out something from the crate?
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
So the wolf was trying. So it was a crate. They put some treat in a crate, and now the task was to pull out, to come up with a come up to pull out the what's the name of that? The whatever treat was within the crate, but it's not so easily approachable. So the wolf would get anxious and try to do it and become aggressive and become like wanting to screw that crate and wanting to, it was like very focused on just fixing and doing the problem independently. Where on the other hand, the dog was solving the problem until a certain moment and then stopped and looked back to an owner, looked back to a handler, wanted to see what would be the next step what would be the next step. So he was looking the guidance from the human. So that was showing that there was a certain awareness of the present moment and interacting within the possibility that the dog itself, will not be able to solve the problem if there wouldn't be for a handler, right?
Yeah. Correct.
Can that give us some kind of aware of that? The dogs are aware that they are not able to solve the problem, and they are aware of that there is somebody by them side, there is next to someone is by their side, and they can be there can be a possibility that someone solves the problem for them, or at least help them navigate through the problem. So that becomes like, and that picks up the big question: is the dog aware of limits and how to break the barrier of the limits by asking for the support and help of the humans?
Yeah, it's really interesting and fascinating to see that the dogs almost have this innate instinct, or that's how they adapted or evolved to really turn to the people for guidance and for support. So I would say there's definitely, some degree of consciousness there. I mean, I think all living beings, everything that's either, material object or a living object, has consciousness or some degree of consciousness. So it's quite incredible.
There was an amazing, I think it was like 1949 or beginning of the 50s and 90s, 50s and 60s of the last century. There was a very famous American philosopher. I think that's philosopher. Is that how? No, psychologist. I'm sorry. And his name was Dr. I think John Watson, or I don't remember his name. Dr. Watson. The most famous experiment he's known for was experiment of Little Albert experiment, and you can Google Little Albert experiment and see what is the Little Albert experiment all about. But the most important, his doctor degree, he found on he was doing a very nice study, and his PhD degree in physiology was done on the animals, and it was called animal education. So he proved through that animal education, experimenting on the mouses, how the knowledge, how the raising knowledge and learning solving a certain problems can give a completely different physiology to a mouse. So he was, it was very cruel experiment actually. So he was teaching mouses to go and navigate through a feeding machine. So they would be able to approach, if they solve the problem fast, and they were solving problem faster in order to approach the food. And then later on, he would experiment and look into their brain to see, is there anything that he will be able to find when analyzing different level of the mouses on the different level of the knowledge, how fast they are solving the problems, the generation and the offspring of the mouses that are solving the problem, and the other ones that are not solving the problem or not even exposed to a problem. The very important conclusion of that study was that there is significant interaction in between a learning and education and the physiology, and what was actually his discovery. So the neurons in our brain don't touch each other. They communicate, like they're very close to each other, but they communicate through the chemical reaction. The chemical reaction actually transmits the information that goes through one into the other in order for some action to happen, whatever the action is to happen. The learning process initiates, and we are using only like 5-10% of our brain. The rest is still waiting to be somehow used. So there is always a way to improve, and there is always much more way for the people to learn. And we always need to look for the new way of learning, because through learning, what we do is we are changing our physiology. So what exactly happened in the mouse is, did you read that? The animal education? Do you know something about that experiment? I don't want to end up talking all to myself again.
No, go ahead. I haven't read it, so I'm not familiar.
Oh, okay. So so what he came up with actually was that, again, another thing, the signal that goes through the neurons and actually communicate with the other neurons goes like jumping over the myelin. So there is a neuron, and then neuron is surrounded with the myelin. How you call those? Myelin opna. So there is something that goes there. I don't know how you call that. So the myelin actually wires around the neuron. So the impulse goes actually by not going through the neuron, but jumping over the myelin. And more myelin is created, more these gaps are creating within the myelin, like more myelin wire around the neuron, faster the impulse goes. So he did found the correlation in between the mouses that actually learned faster to get to the food, because the myelin within their brain was much, they had much more myelin wires.
Myelin sheath.
Okay, sheath. How you call that? How you say that? Sheath. So they had much more myelin sheaths on the neurons, what actually gave a possibility to the impulse to jump through them. And more jumps the impulse does, faster the transmission of the action will be initiated by the brain. So that exactly proved that every single mouse that learned did have a possibility to raise the consciousness around the solving the problem. So become that it's not only that the dog that mouses were kind of like reacting instinctively on what is to be done, but also they structure their brain around the certain things that they become conscious about. If they do this, then gonna happen that. So awareness of the mouses become much more present, and they become aware of how to solve the problem. Why? Because through the learning process, the physiology of their brain changed, and that is how they were able to give a rise to a consciousness if solving the problem was in question. So the level of the consciousness and awareness do exist in the animals. And it's also, the question becomes like how humans can help dogs and help other animals engage into a learning process, and what the learning process actually would be if the solving some puzzles and problems would be just interaction with the dogs, to give them possibility to change the physiology and bring it to the level to give a rise to a higher consciousness, higher awareness. And why we are facing such a big challenge living next to a dog is because the dogs does not have present, future, and past. The dogs have only one time in their mind, and it's now. They are not aware, are we away from our home like 1 hour, 1 day, 3 days, 3 hours, 3 whatever. They are aware of, we went out, we came back. It can be a month later, it can be hour later, it can be 10 minutes later. They're gonna interact with us on almost the same level. Why? It's because the perception of the time doesn't exist. And if that doesn't exist, then they become again, does the awareness of the level of the human consciousness can be applied to a dog's? On the certain level, for sure, yes. But then do we become like, are we losing the battle of the awareness? Are the dogs much more aware of the environment that they are living in? And because of that, they become scared of the environment because their humans are not present. They're aware that we are not aware. We are predicting the future and we are balancing the past, so that we are missing the only reality of our life, that's now. And if we are missing only reality of our now, and we are not aware of what's going on now, the dogs feel that the future is to be challenged. That is where the substance of the human-dog interaction is challenged, because the dogs are much more aware of the reality around them than the humans are, even though this world is a human-made world. And that's where the drama starts. You know, when if you are a professional groomer, or you serve the grooming or any pet care business, so you are professionally involved with working with dogs, the problem becomes you are, for example, I was grooming dogs for a long time, like 25 years. I had my shops and I developed myself through that career and everything. So I was oftentimes aware that I'm not aware. How did I know that I'm not aware? Because the dogs were taking over and doing things I didn't want them to do. Why? Because I was thinking about what's going to happen tomorrow. Did I pay the rent? Will the next client come? Or how it's going to show? Who's going to judge me? What's going to happen here? What's going to happen there? And the dog was on the table, and the dog was, later on I developed that I want to be present much more. So then I took off that safety loops that were hanging the dogs. And, I'm not calling them safety loop, because I saw in my school in Budapest when I was 16, I suffered a very big stress when I saw the dog was hanged himself, not because the dog wanted to jump, but because he slipped. And because the dog slipped, he cracked his neck, and he just stayed to hang on a safety loop. So then I said, and I promised myself that I won't have dogs that I will put on a table and then wait for them to stay and then to hang them there. I just worked with my dogs on a table, unleashed. But in order to do that, you really need to be present, because otherwise the dog might choose to jump off the table. And not that that didn't happen to me, but always learned me that they are waiting for that one moment of me not being present so they can do whatever they want. Because my dogs were free to do whatever they wanted. So I never forced any dog to do nothing. So I always waited for them to consent, if I can say that way. But I was always creating an environment for them, so their response to me would be the behavior I want to have from them. Cooperation requires a lot of things to be done. Requires for you to be very present and aware of the reality of you two interacting together at the same time.
So what can we practice to be more self-aware with our dogs, to be in the moment and not to get caught up, like you just said, living in the past and predicting the future, which is all too common nowadays?
But yeah, because first of all, we need to become aware of, we do become of what we expose ourselves to. So be very aware of who you spend your time with, what you are watching, what you are listening consciously, what you are listening unconsciously. Because everything of that shapes the reality of ours and shapes our consciousness. So everything we learn about without even knowing we are learning. For example, I did have that, I don't know where was conducted that experiment. The girls, the people were, I don't know the country, but I know the outcome. For example, let's do America and let's do very political things. So the people that were they are not used to vote.
Apolitical.
No, it's very political. Like then I'm gonna, because now you're gonna see how dangerous might be.
No, I'm saying the individuals were.
Yeah, the individuals were apolitical. So they were not. So the case study was they were apolitical and they were not watching the movie, the TV. So that's how they looked for the people. So the experiment was that the people gonna be not just having a TV in their homes, because they're not used to watching TV. The idea was just to put the TV on in the morning and turn it off in the afternoon. So just not sit to watch TV, just put it on and off, on in the morning, off in the afternoon. And of course, for example, they would do the test was to expose people to the Fox News or to expose people to the CNN News. Apolitical people were later on given chance to vote and choose their voter to vote from whoever. So the people that completely were unaware of what's going on around them were voting. If they were exposed to the Fox, they were voting red. If they were exposed to CNN, they would vote red. That is how important and that is how unprotectful we can be if we consciously doesn't choose what we want to learn, listen, be exposed to, because that's what we're going to become. Our mind and our consciousness is programmed. The question becomes, who we gonna let it program? And who gonna program it if we won't program it because we are busy paying the bills? That's what the people need to understand, that the consciousness is not something that we are getting for granted. Even if when I'm expressing my freedom and my free will in a way of me going to the supermarket and buying whatever I think I should buy, I think I'm expressing my free will. However, I'm going after the colors, the brands, that I was raised into.
Or even much deeper, it's everything that we're thinking, the language that we're thinking in. Everything is, it sounds crazy, but it's almost like we're a perfect built machine that from the day we were born, or probably even sooner, from the day we were conceived, we just inherited everything, how we're thinking, what we're thinking. It's crazy.
If we need a battery here, it's whatever. So for example, our thoughts, we have a thoughts on English or on Serbian, for example, we are from Serbia, so sometimes we think on Serbian. How come that I don't think on Chinese? I don't know Chinese, or I don't know Russian, or I don't know Polish, or I don't know German. Why? Because I'm not programmed on those frequencies. I'm not programmed to know and to understand what's going on. I might feel what's going on, but I wouldn't understand it. So if I need for my thoughts I become aware of my thoughts, I need a language. So I can sometimes feel that I feel something, so I just can't give words to those feelings. And that is how a lot of my patents and discoveries happen. My book happened by me feeling her first, me feeling this everything first, and then giving a thoughts that I was able to articulate and finally put them on a paper. But that energy, creative energy, the question becomes like that I need to let it go through the filter of the cultural programming. That means that I can't think on Chinese, or I can't think on Russian or on German. If I can't think on German, becomes that I can't be aware of myself in German. So I'm not programmed. And if I would be programmed on German, that would depend only on what? Of my environment that I would be raised into. So if I'm raised to speak English as the best I can, still Tarzaning around and things like that, if I know how to challenge my thoughts, okay, let's go on Serbian perfectly, and I don't know how to express and hear them on German, that means that for me, in order to talk and think, I need to be programmed. And who programmed me? The school, the parents, the media, the educational system, the religion, the church, the believe, I don't believe, I believe. I don't believe is a believing that I don't believe. Mm-hmm. So from those points, understanding, it's, we need to ask those questions sooner or later. Otherwise, we're going to miss entire life next to our dogs, because they are programmed to think on the language of the nature. That's the only one they can understand. Everything over that is a learning process. And if we are learning and teaching them consciously, becomes like, are we creating from them something that's going to end up being a circus animal, like a lion or tiger jumping through the fire, or doing something that they learned to do? Those animals did that from the fear. Does that mean that they developed different physiology? Of course. Why? Because Watson proved every single time we learn something, our physiology changes. So it's not that I'm thinking because I'm thinking. I'm thinking because I am. I don't want to think. I am, so I think. And that's the problem. Everyone tells us, oh, you need to change your thoughts and then change your life and change this and change that. And why we can't change them? Because first, we need to become. Our physiology needs to become. And how the physiology changes, as the Watson proved, by learning. By the learning, our brain changes. And when our brain changes, our physiology changes. More myelin, how you call them? Shifts we have around our neurons, faster the transition of the impulse through the neuron will be. The chemical reaction that happens in between communicating two neurons need to override the old belief system. So in order for us to do something and to make something, some new habit become a habit, we need to override the old program first. And why oftentimes the people pull back? Because sometimes the same amount of the neurons controlling a new habit and the bad habit are of the same size. And then the body itself becomes confused which one to choose in order to act. So in order for us to change our behavior, first we need to change our physiology consciously. And that's, if we take our life in the possession from that perspective, means that we are able to interact with our dogs on conscious level with more awareness, from the level from the level of changing our physiologies. The dog can't change its behavior before the dog doesn't change its physiology, how it's going to change through our interaction with an animal. And now we need to become a responsible owners and help them transition from the old behavior into a new. And oftentimes, why the dogs act a certain way is because they are connected with us on the emotional level. And that's what happens, is that our physiologies are developed without us being aware of that. So in order to fight, or in order to reprogram that, we need to become consciously engaged in our everyday life, in every moment to moment, in minute to minute, in order not to allow outside forces to penetrate our subconsciousness and provide a physiology to our mind, to our brain, that will program our mind, that will program our beliefs, that will program our actions without us even being aware of that. Why? Because we are busy with our life. We have things to do. We have phones to answer. We have party to go. We have birthdays. We have coffees to share with our friends. And everything of us holds us in this bubble. And the dogs are there waiting for us to awake. Because it's nothing going to happen overnight. What is a culmination? How do we impact on our brain? Oftentimes, trauma is very high impulse, and trauma, when happens, in order for brain to prevent trauma from happening again, the impulse that happens in between neurons is so strong, because the trauma lasted long time enough to embed itself in our physiology, or impacted our life, just boom. So in order for brain to process a future event, he creates a memory. It's a body memory, it's a muscle memory, it's a brain memory, it's a neurological memory. It's nothing you want or you don't want, it is. So in order for us to get out from that, it's a path of recreating physiology that will overwrite the old programming and become the new belief system. That's also in the Dr. Watson's little Albert experiment. He experimented with a little Albert, and he said, like, idea that he was I don't know where he was doing that, somewhere here in America. And the little Albert was a baby of like 6-7 months. And he gave to a cleaning lady that was working in a hospital $1 for her to give a baby for the experiment. So they were interacting with the baby, exposing baby to a new how you call that? New objects, like a little rabbit, like a monkey, like some little teddy bears, blankets, and things like that. And the baby was very interesting to watch what's going on, and then touching them, and then playing, being very happy baby, interacting with the possible the mouse and things like that. So that was the first stage of the experiment. Then the next stage of the experiment was that every single time that the baby approaches, little Albert approaches some of these objects, behind the curtain, the big noise would be created. So he would take a Sherpa, pots and pans, and just, create a big noise. So only in a couple of seconds in a day, like next day, when you would just bring to the Albert a little mouse or anything that he interacted, remembered, and every single time he touched the rabbit, the noise was created. And then the blanket, he sees the noise was creating. So he starts actually being very scared of. So the next stage of the experiment was bringing him those little objects without creating a sound effect. So he was just thinking that if he repeats, Pavlov experiment was end of the 19th century, so 18, I don't know, something, because he already on the 1904 he got a Nobel Prize for that. So it must be end of the late 1800s. And then he said, like, I would love to repeat the Pavlov's experiment, that he did it with the dogs. And the dogs experiment again was interacting the behavior with the physiology. The physiology changes, and that is why we behave, not because we want. And in order for us to retract that is a conscious push to rewrite the program in our brain. And then what happens to the little Albert is that actually what happens to the little Albert was that the mother got scared. And then she took Albert one night and she just ran away from the hospital. And no one heard ever about what happened until the age there are some graves and some kind of stories that actually he died of hydrocephalus later when he was like 9 or 10 years old. Of course, the Watsons and his assistant got very much criticized over the Albert experiment, and then he tried to pull back from that he's blamed on the mother, because he said actually the entire experiment was done in 4 stages. So it was like first stage, interaction with the animal, then develop the fear towards animal, then bring the animal only and interact, see how long the fear gonna evolve or gonna decrease, because there not be any more trauma going next to the object. And then what he wanted to do in the final stage of the experiment, he wanted to reprogram the little Albert so he stopped being scared of the animals and the objects. But he claimed that because the mother ran away with the little boy, he never get a chance to increase the impact on the little Albert. So it's kind of he goes, he forgot the mind gonna be reprogrammed over, so it's going to be reprogrammed over that memories. And that is why the damage to the brain were so high that they developed the hydrocephalus. Some, of course, there is now how to of those links. Is that exactly what happened because baby was perfectly happy and healthy? Is that the little Albert that actually was put through the experiment? Later on, it's a lot of stories about how did they wanted to wash this off, but this little Albert showed a lot of trauma impacted the physiology. But by knowing the Watson's first animal education experiment, where he was really literally interested in how the physiology is impacted by the knowledge, by the learning curve, and how our brain develops physiologically when we learn something, how that learning changes the perception, and how everything that we believe in can be overwritten with the new conscious decision of the doing so. So, and that is where we need to find our place to interact with the consciousness of the dogs, because it does exist. The level of the consciousness we can debate around, how conscious they are around about experiencing inner world and outer world, and how conscious they can be of their own subjectivity, or everything is happening around the object of the experience outside themselves. That's for the philosophical debate. But physiology can change. More physiology changes through learning, gives a rise of the consciousness. And then occasionally we can really enjoy a human-animal interaction based on respect. We can't humanize them. We can dehumanize ourselves. And that's the danger of that interaction. And instead of gaining a blessing from it, we might be paying the big price. So,
yeah, fascinating. Maybe we'll do questions or a microdose episode tomorrow or in 2 days, because I think this is very dense and it's hard to follow. So I'm going to definitely rewatch it. And for everyone who stuck through it, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Send us your likes, your comments, your shares, and see you soon, next week or in between.
Thank you so much and have a wonderful week. Bye.